Today is November the 12th, 2021, and this is the Friendship News Hour presented to you by Bummer Dude Media. My name is Frank. His name is Alex, and today we have the distinct pleasure of being joined by a current freelance reporter, former Los Angeles Times reporter from 2004 to 2014, author of numerous books, including Dreamland, The True Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic. Sam Quinones. Hey, Sam, how are you?
Good. How about you?
Hey, doing well. I appreciate you asking. Thanks for spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it. The reason that you're on our radar, after all, is from your article in The Atlantic, titled a cheaper new. Is that what it's called? Sorry, I don't see the.
No, it's called. I don't even know what. Don't even know that I call it meth anymore.
That's right. That's right. A very detailed expose into the current state of methamphetamine in America. So we wanted to get you on. We covered your article a couple of weeks ago, and there was a giant response on TikTok, of all things, with current and former meth users commenting on the article, facts of it, and starting their own discussions. It kind of blew us away, Sam. We had no idea the community that we would run into when we put up that video, and the response was pretty overwhelming. So we reached out, and glad you're here. So could you let us know, how did you get started in reporting on methamphetamine in particular?
Well, that story that you refer to is actually an excerpt of my new book, which is called "The Least of Us: True Tales of America and Hope in the Time of Fentanyl and Meth." I've been covering Mexican drug trafficking for a while, and I lived down in Mexico for 10 years, and methamphetamine is just the latest. It's part of a move among Mexican drug traffickers away from plant-based drugs and towards synthetic-based drugs, meaning drugs you can make in a laboratory out of just chemicals, no plants involved. And methamphetamine was really the first drug that the traffickers discovered that they could do that with. And I was in the 90s and into the 2000s and so on. And then they discovered fentanyl, which is kind of a substitute for heroin. It's made, again, synthetically. It's a chemical process, and no plants involved, unlike heroin, which has a heroin poppy. So I've been just covering this, and it's very hard if you're covering this stuff not to understand that major move away from plants towards synthetics, seems to me, in Mexico. And the fact that because of that, that they have access to chemicals over the world markets through the ports that they have on the Pacific coast of Mexico, and all that allows them to produce these drugs, these synthetic drugs, in quantities that are just overwhelming and never before seen, frankly. And so that's how I got onto this. It just was too big a story to avoid, to not see.
Sure. You mentioned synthetics, and in your article, you reference P2P meth quite often. And when we were looking through the responses to our video, a lot of responses brought up P2P meth as almost a novelty. There was a bit of like a what's the word I'm looking for? Nostalgia to it. And a lot of people say, hey, that this P2P meth was back in the 90s. This doesn't exist anymore. They called it prope dope. A lot of people called it prope dope. But after reading your article a couple of times, I'm convinced that what you're saying right now is true, that it's easier to make, it's synthetic. And I think it speaks to just how low this drug is on our collective radar, right? We hear about fentanyl all the time because people are overdosing and dying on rapid rates. And, heroin, huge story. in America, but meth seems to get lost in the mix. Why do you think that is?
I think because very few people actually overdose and die on methamphetamine. It's not something you die from. Generally, there are ways. I mean, you can have a heart attack and that kind of thing, but generally, it's certainly not as commonly as you would on an opioid like fentanyl or heroin. And so I think that is really one reason that if you don't die on it, it just doesn't register as much with the public, I think.
But no less of an effect on drug users in general, right? Like it is as
Sure.
devastating as these other drugs that can kill you instantaneously. Is that correct?
Oh, of course, yes. I think that's what my reporting shows for this next book, The Least of Us. It's that you have this new way of, it's really an old way. The new way is actually an old way of making methamphetamine with phenyl-2-propanone. That's where the prop dope comes from. Phenyl-2-propanone, also known as P2P. Now, they make the methamphetamine, there's a variety of ways of making, let me put it this way, the precursor P2P, a variety of ways of making that, all using chemicals that are legal, industrial, and many of them very toxic. And so this new way has taken over as the Mexican government has made it very, very difficult to get your hands on. The former precursor that was really actually far more efficient, much, much easier way of making methamphetamine was with a chemical called ephedrine. It's a decongestant, you find it in Sudafed pills, that kind of thing. You would really prefer to make methamphetamine with ephedrine, but it's not easy to get anymore in Mexico, and so now they're using these other methods, and all with the precursor P2P. Now, along with that, it seems has come is all of that as they've produced all this enormous quantity of dope, that's really all across the country now. For the first time ever, we really have methamphetamine in every part of the United States. Along with that, it's been accompanied by very severe, rapid onset symptoms of mental illness, symptoms of schizophrenia, really, paranoia, hallucinations, grave, serious delusions, inability to really get along with people. And the ephedrine meth was kind of a party drug. You want to be around other people. This one is very, very different. It's not the same thing. And it sends people into that kind of their shell. And so very quickly also people are homeless. And then very quickly also, I would say, and this I think explains, it goes a long way to explaining why we have are the tent encampments that we have around the country, primarily on the western United States, but also in many other parts of the country. And that's because people who are grown delusional and mentally ill due to methamphetamine can't be in houses, can't be in apartments, so they're on the street, but they also cannot really be in homeless shelters, because those shelters are even more scary than the apartments. They're filled with people. Everyone, you think you're being surrounded by people, all of them trying to kill you, and it's kind of very scary paranoia. And so the tent is actually the perfect place for you to stay if you were, because it's like a little pod, it's your own little self-contained universe, and you're all alone. You're kind of away from all these people. Plus, an encampment works also. You're not just off in the middle of nowhere, because the tent encampment is filled with the drugs that you need and you want and you're addicted to.
Yeah, goodness gracious.
Now, Sam, when you're putting together your books, this article, are you going and like spending time in these encampments, talking to people, interviewing them? How are you putting?
Yes, but also it's a good question, but I would say that probably more effective than that, because those people are virtually incapable of talking. I mean, in a rational way. Far, far more effective and efficient and a better way of getting real usable information is to talk with people who are in recovery from that, who have left that world, number one.
Sure.
And I've talked to several of those. People who work those areas, police officers, drug counselors, treatment folks of all kinds. That is really where you get better information, because the fact is that talking with those folks is a very scary thing for them. And frequently they're speaking in ways that don't make any sense anyway. And so it's not, it's a scary thing to behold, people just kind of shrieking and walking around naked and babbling and, that kind of thing. You can't really get much information of. The other thing that's important, that's connected to what I just said, is that it's also very difficult to get these folks into treatment. And the reason for that is the same thing. Because drug recovery, drug treatment requires a connection, a human connection, one-on-one. The problem is, if you are a drug counselor trying to connect with a person who's addicted to this stuff, it's very difficult to make any connection, because that person is speaking to you, again, in this thing that's called word salad, which is just a big jumble of words, and you have no idea what they're talking about. And so it's very, very difficult for drug counselors it takes a while. That people need to detox for weeks. And sometimes even then, the effects don't really leave. I mean, I talked to several folks like that, where, one guy was still trying to figure out how to talk. Literally, he had kind of lost the ability to talk. And I'm not sure if he actually meant that literally. At one point he meant it literally, and then another point he was saying, it's not like I forgot to talk, it's like I forgot how to insert myself in a conversation. I would think so deeply about what I was trying to say, and was that the right thing, and was very paranoid about seeming like an idiot. And then after a while it would be pointless to say what he was going to say, because the moment had passed. It's kind of hard to say. It's and it's also, I would say, very different for each person. But I would say the common denominator is this rapid onset of symptoms of paranoia, of schizophrenia, paranoia, hallucinations, and stuff like that, which is not the case. Okay, very definitely not the case with ephedrine meth. Ephedrine meth would keep you up for several days, and after the fourth day or so, you would begin to see these kind of what's known as shadow people. You think there's a person over here, you turn, the person's gone. But that kind of thing. But that really had more to do with sleep deprivation. No meth is good for you. Okay, let me just make that clear that point. No meth is good for you, but also but the ephedrine meth was definitely not this one where you went into your shell, both mentally as well as physically, in the tent. And so all of that means that says to me, and I think says to a lot of people, that this is a very different situation. This is not the stuff that was on the street, particularly the Western United States when ephedrine meth was big. It's not the same stuff. It's a very different situation, and it creates a lot of different social problems: homelessness, mental illness, difficulty in treatment, all that kind of stuff is part of the mix.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a lot of responses that we had gotten on TikTok said that they kind of poo-pooed what we were saying. Like, no, it doesn't have much to do with the drug itself, but it has to do with you staying up for days on end, and then you start to hallucinate and lose your mind a little bit. But it seems to me that those folks aren't really privy to this other type of drug that's out there that you said it got this rapid onset mental illness.
Yes, I've spoken with many people who've, within hours, immediately, within a day, something like that. Sure, staying up for days will play havoc on your brain. There's no doubt about it. But I'm sure that that's part of the mix. After a while, after people are up for several days, that's also part of it. But that does not explain what's going on with this drug, I'm afraid. This drug, the way it's made, or something about it. Here's the other thing I want to make sure that everyone knows. I'm not a neuroscience. I don't study the effects of drugs of abuse on the brain. There are scientists who do that. They are qualified to understand this in a way that I probably am not. There are no journal studies, no mice or rat studies about this at all. This is just street reporting. This is talking to people who have been around this for a long time, recognizing there was a major shift in how it was made. And when that shift took place, people were reporting in all the places I actually went to or called. It's the same story. It's the same story. So what exactly is going on is a great question, and I don't I'm not saying I know. What I'm saying is that this form of methamphetamine made this way seems to be accompanied very routinely, very quickly by this rapid onset of symptoms of schizophrenia, and creating a lot of problems when it does. Foremost among those, mental illness and the homeless encampments that we're seeing in many parts of the country.
Yeah, sure. And I want to touch on that a little bit more. Obviously, correlation is not causation, but in your article, you did draw a straight line connection between the general availability of this drug and the enormous population of homeless, and not just homeless, but you mentioned it, tent encampments. I'm based out of San Diego, so I see this all the time. I just traveled from Sacramento, and it is almost as bad in Sacramento. If you go anywhere in Oakland, along the harbor in Berkeley, it's so bad you almost can't fathom it. So for folks out there who are listening who aren't on the West Coast, it's as serious of a problem as it's ever been. And you mentioned in that article that the folks in leadership of these cities are trying to shield that problem from being a quote unquote drug problem, and the focus has tried to be shift towards general housing prices or any other thing to not cause a stigma of drug users with homelessness. Why do you think that we do that? Because I recognize that here in San Diego as well. Why can't we call out this issue as it is and then attempt to fix it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there is a lot of that behind what's going on now. Let's be clear too. There's very definitely in California and many other places a real issue with the high cost of housing. There's just no doubt about that. Okay. That does not mean, though, that has any. I don't think that really has much to do with the kind of homelessness we're talking about. Again, there's not just one kind of homelessness. There are many kinds, many motivations behind home. But the tent encampment homelessness, I think a major driver of that is this methamphetamine now coming out, and in quantities that are boggle the mind. So they cover the United States with methamphetamine and the price drops. So they make so much of it that they can cover from LA to Vermont, and still the price drops. Wow. It's not like the price is going higher; it's going lower. It's dropped by 80% in many areas. And that's the other thing. It's not just San Diego. It's not just Seattle, San Francisco, LA. It is rural Indiana, central rural Oregon, small towns, West Virginia, et cetera. It's just Boston. It's like all over, this tent encampment problem, this homeless problem, and it all arrives just at the same time as the meth. You're right. There is a correlation, is not causation. On the other hand, it does mean something. And what I was trying to do is really, well, first of all, tell a story that nobody had told, break a story that nobody had told. And I'm doing that with my book, The Least of Us. I couldn't believe it. I mean, this would be a story that really ought to have been broken by a newspaper reporter or a radio, local folks, someone who's stepping over the problem every day. And yet nobody has. It seems to me a bizarre situation, not necessarily a healthy one, because if you're relying on book reporters who take 3-4 years to finish a book, that doesn't mean much for the functioning of the Fifth Estate. You gotta really wonder if what's gone wrong here. But I do believe, as you said, Frank, that this is connected to a kind of a woke sensibility, a politically correct sensibility that says we must never talk about people who we perceive to be victims in a bad way. Well, that's fine, except for that when it means that you avoid the true causes, or certainly a major driver of this, and you are then skewing the conversation so you can really never find a policy solution that works or begins to work. Let's put it that way, because there's lots of solutions that need to be tried on this. It's very difficult to imagine anything happening without people actually getting detoxed off methamphetamine. The idea that you would give a person who's in florid psychosis, a house, and think that that would work is beyond reason. I think it's crazy. It's first comes detox, and that can take weeks, sometimes months in this case, not like heroin where it's 2-3 weeks and you're done, you're out, it's out of your system. You know, here it's a whole lot different. The mental scars, the mental shredding that goes on is severe, particularly when people have used it a lot and lived on the street for a good long time. We're seeing a lot of those people now.
Yeah, sure.
So,
and you know, outside of purging the drug from one's system, they first have to come to a realization in their own head that they actually need help.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen. No, what I think needs to happen is we need to be in the kind of in the business, you might say, of removing these folks from the street. There's the idea that you would come to some idea that I'm ready for treatment when you are screaming at demons that no one else sees. Yeah. I just think that's an completely unrealistic, and what that actually means is people will stay on the street until they die. Okay, yeah, something happens. They get hit by a car. They get some disease. Something like that will happen. I think it's absolutely incumbent upon us now to say, understand that these folks will always be homeless as long as they use this kind of dope. It seems very clear to me that this is a very strong connection, if not causation, as you say. And it seems to me that if we don't do that, we're going to have these encampments and we're going to have people strung out, tormented, horribly tormented. The idea, the part of this problem is that this is happening just as we've got these ideas of the criminal justice about criminal justice reform, so that police now ought not any longer make arrests for small level drug busts and you know, syringes or stolen property or stuff that really is evidence of a much larger addiction problem that we should not make. And the idea that we should not arrest people, we should be arresting people like that to then send them to prison, I do believe is wrong. It doesn't help. It's a waste of money. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that there's an effect there still is an effect of arresting people and getting them off the street and beginning that detox. That is the key thing. People cannot survive, will not survive. They will go crazy. They'll then get some meth with fentanyl in it and die. Whatever it is, there is nothing good. It is nothing compassionate, nothing kind or merciful by leaving people on the street, particularly in this condition, and with the drugs circulating in the quantities and the potency that we know that they are.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I mean, when we first talked about this article, Alex and I, we posed that question to ourselves: what the heck do we do? You know, because like you, I don't necessarily think that, you know, drug use of this kind makes you a criminal, right? And I think that's where the mind goes when you say, hey, we're going to, you know, crack down on this drug use by arresting the users and then sending them to jail, and then they don't get the help they need and they just go back out on the street, and it's a vicious cycle. But gosh, we have to start somewhere, right? And if we're not going to do anything, then, like you said, there's nothing merciful about that whatsoever.
And the least of us, my book that's just out that has all this story in there. Again, that Atlantic piece was kind of a distillation of what I've written in the book. I go into another thing I think is incumbent on us to do, and that is rethink jail. And this is happening in many parts of the country, not so much in California, I don't think, but certainly in the areas most affected by the opioid epidemic. There's a number of places I can point you to where they're really trying to rethink jail. So jail up to now, traditionally, all across the country for decades, has been a place where you just send people to vegetate. They just sit, right? They watch TV, Judge Judy or something like that, you know, Real Housewives or some nonsense, and they sit around playing poker and comparing criminal notes, and that's about it, right? So the idea, though, now is really taking hold, and I think it's a very healthy one, a very wise one, is that we now need to make jail a place of recovery. And the way you do that is separating out a pod or two or three, but generally starts with one, and you make that a pod where people opt in, the inmates opt into it, so they're volunteering, and they make their bed every morning. There's no TV watching all day long. You are working on your recovery. There's classes in criminal addictive thinking. There's GED classes. There's 12-step meetings run by the folks in the cell, in the pod. These are being tried in Ohio, in Kentucky, Virginia, West Virginia. There's various places, and there's new ones trying all the time. And as I said, in The Least of Us, there's 3 chapters on one county in Kentucky that's doing just this. What that means is that you can actually provide a place for people who are in jail because of some addiction problem, because they stole some stuff, but it really is about addiction while they're there, and they can begin the recovery process. This is not, again, a purely criminal issue. There's a very clear connection to whatever addiction they're suffering from. And so I think that as these drugs have taken hold, fentanyl and methamphetamine, they've made changing jail more important than ever. We need to find a way of using jail to be a place where recovery can begin, and it's being tried. It's just, I'm not sure if it's being tried in California.
Do you think that, like what Oregon's doing, where they decriminalized, all drugs or the possession of drugs, do you think that hurts or helps this situation?
I think it totally hurts the situation.
Yeah.
Why would you? That's a death sentence. That is a death sentence to me. There's nobody who lasts on the street as a fentanyl user, and everybody's a fentanyl user now because they're mixing it into everything. You don't last on the street. It's not like heroin where you can live for 10, 20, 30 years. I've met people do this using heroin. Fentanyl will kill you. You will die. It is an absolute death sentence to be left on the street while these are the drugs that are out there, and particularly in such ghastly quantities and potency. So to me, it feels like to leave people out there. What's happened is a fascinating thing. Our thinking on what to do about addiction and drugs, decriminalization has been around for years, decades.
Yeah.
And that's fine. And there may very well have been a time when those ideas were much more appropriate, were really than what we were trying at the time. I would easily go along with that. The problem is the drugs changed, right? The drugs are now produced in such scary quantities, such low prices, such prevalence, that it makes us rethink. It forces us to rethink ideas that we've long held. The problem is our thinking has not changed what the drugs have. And so the thinking has not changed with regard to decriminalization. That's an idea that's been around for a while, but the drugs are now deadly. And so leaving people on the street is a death sentence right now. Okay. Yeah. There's no pretty way to say that.
Now, do you find that there's been in your research, like an effective way that people are communicating or, breaking into the minds of these people that are addicted on the street and getting them to, decide for themselves that they need to get treatment?
No, that doesn't. I mean, that happens in some cases. There's a few, but I interviewed one guy I spent a lot of time with is a guy named Eric Barrera, who was a homeless outreach coordinator for a nonprofit dealing with veterans. He was an ex-Marine. He used methamphetamine for many years and was fine. I mean, not fine, but he wasn't. It was a party drug. He was holding on to his life, kind of, and then he was the first person I've ever met who used this new meth is Eric Barrera in 2009 in Southern California, Temecula.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He very quickly went out of his mind. And when I met him, he was outreaching to tent encampments, and he said, what's scary about it is everybody, all the people I run into in these tent encampments, they all are suffering from the same form of degradation, mental degradation and decomposition and mental illness that I see myself in them all the time. It's a daily thing, he said, and getting them to treatment, it's like almost impossible, he said. It's a very, very, very hard thing because even when they're detoxed, here's the other thing, that even when you're detoxed off this stuff, you're not necessarily happy because you're still dealing with the consequences, and you're still seeing the paranoia. I was talking with a fellow recently who runs a treatment center. He says the thing about it is, I know people who've a friend of mine. He told me been off this stuff for 2 years, and still every black car he sees go by, he's sure it's the FBI coming for him. That kind of thing. And so it's you're not happy. The problem is that the drug is so damaging to the brain that you're really not happy. And so it's very easy to go back to the drug,
Yeah, absolutely. So if I'm hearing you correct, and we still need to maintain some sort of maybe not criminality, but certainly illegality with these drugs, right? Like it is not okay as a society that we use these drugs. And also we have some sort of responsibility to save these people from themselves. In
Right.
that, we do pick them up, and, we do book them, but also we cannot continue to treat them as if they were a violent criminal or some petty thief. Or,
No, because that's what I say. That's why jail is so important to change. There is a place for violent people in jail. Of course, that's where they should be. But just letting people go is not a benefit. You have to understand. I mean, it seems to me that people aren't understanding the effects of drugs of abuse on the brain. The drugs of abuse on the brain do damaging things and revert eons of evolution. We evolved to have our brains tell us to reward us with good feelings when we had sex and ate, and on drugs of abuse, people don't. They're all alone in their own scary world. We survived as a species because we evolved to prize community over all things. So you go off on your own and you get eaten. Many millennia ago, right? And so we evolved to be community-based people. Well, the drugs of abuse, and particularly these two, just send you off into your own little world, right? And our brain has also evolved to absolutely immediately, instantaneously tell us to flee when danger is near. And yet here people are living in tent encampments, no hygiene, utter, threats of death almost daily, every place in a million different ways. And the body is still telling them, and the brain is still telling them, get more dope, because the dope has taken over the brain, hijacked the brain. Okay.
Yeah.
So the idea that somehow people can make a rational decision is, I think, nonsensical and flies in the face of every piece of information and every observation we could possibly make about homelessness and drug addiction today, it seems to me.
Yeah.
So no, I think we need to use the leverage that we have to combat that extraordinary power that drugs have over our brains. And part of that is criminal justice, part of that is criminal justice charges, but I do believe it begins with detoxing. People need to kind of get off the crap and then begin to see their lives in a more rational way, and then repair can begin.
Yeah, well said. Without giving away everything in your new book, what sort of results have these Midwestern jails seen in their separation of these inmates?
Well, I think, good and bad. We're talking about the central nervous system of the brain, which is a very, very complicated organ and a complex system. I would say that they're not panaceas. That's not the point, that they solve everything. Rather, they are an approach. They're the beginning of a community approach to addiction that will then involve changes on the outside too, because not just in the jail that's going to help you. It's what happens outside.
Certainly.
What services, what housing, what ability to get a continuum of care once you're out. What a continuum of care is commonplace in medicine. I'm a heart attack patient. Continuum of care means I see my doctor every 6 months. It means I take these pills. It means I do exercise, all that kind of stuff. Continuum of care with addiction is, can we try and help people get their driver's license back, pay their traffic fines, pay their probation and child support, get clothes, get jobs, get sober living situations, and make those sober living situations really sober living situations and not just ostensibly sober. All of this is part of the continuum of care. And I think all of that has to happen. I think jail is part of it, but it's a part of a community base. Up to now, we've really not found ways of putting the community to work, or the community services, making them available in the ways that they should for a lot of people once they're sober and a few months down the road. So it's all part of a larger approach. It has to use criminal justice. In fact, criminal justice and supply interdiction are essential. Prevention is absolutely probably the most important of all. There's a lot of things that need to work. This is just one aspect of it, but I do believe that jail up to now has been a real anchor around our neck. It has really not been a good thing. No good stuff happens in the jails the way they're traditionally run. So rethinking these jails, thinking that maybe this is a moment to create some inner reflection on the part of folks who've been on the street. I think that's a very good thing. Turns out that they're actually cleaner and cheaper to run too, because there's not many fights and the inmates do the cleaning and all that kind of stuff. So it's actually a win-win all the way around. I'm just bringing it up because as one approach of many that need to be thought out.
Absolutely. When we first were alerted to this article in the Atlantic, I think we were both sort of taken aback because we weren't aware of the severity of the problem. And then as time went on, I was a little bit shocked to see that this wasn't a bigger deal, that I wasn't hearing more about it. Have you been disappointed with the response to this article coming out in the Atlantic?
Not the response to my article, no. I would say I was disappointed that no one had broken the story before me, without a doubt. I couldn't believe it. This is everywhere. You see it everywhere. The supplies are clear. There's just no doubting that. And so no, I was pretty happy. The response was in fact, many people wrote to me saying, I work in a clinic in a major West Coast city, and half a psych ward, basically a psych clinic, and half of our clients are mentally ill on methamphetamine. No, I hear this all. I thought the response was great, and it's being used in city discussions over this. That's what should have happened like 5 years ago, man. It just boggles the mind that it took a book writer to break that story. To me, that's a scary thing. It should have been a newspaper reporter, a radio reporter who lives in that town, who lives in one of these towns that might be affected. Instead, it seems to me that there's just this enforced, interesting little psychological games people play, but I think there's kind of like this self-censorship that people apply. Like, I don't want to talk about this because it might be viewed badly, or I might be impugning people who should be viewed as victims, and people use the term people experiencing homelessness.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of saying homeless people, right? Sure. It's just a sense that we're not going to go where the story really is trying to take us, and I think it's a sad thing.
Are you of the mind that this is? I mean, obviously, you're not the only one to have known about it, but are you of the mind that somebody had the opportunity to do what you did and just didn't do it?
I have no idea. All I know is that nobody did it. I have no idea. Could be that people aren't aware of this change in methamphetamine. Could be, newspapers are under a lot of stress and staffing levels are low and budgets are low, and you don't have really time to focus. All of that is part of the mix. I'm quite sure, actually, and I don't know if people had the opportunity to write this story and did not, but it seems to me that it'd be very hard to spend time on homelessness in California, especially, but anywhere really now, and not see the enormous effect of methamphetamine in this problem.
No doubt. That was the biggest thing that jumped out to me is, I had noticed the homelessness problem just skyrocket here in Southern California. And, I'd been to Skid Row in LA before, and we had done some work out there. And I started to see that sprout here in San Diego. And then, with trips to the Bay Area and San Francisco and Oakland, I just thought, man, like this is really getting out of hand. But it never crossed my mind that there was something out there that the public wasn't aware of that was leading to this. So,
well, everyone was kind of just convinced that it had to do with the cost of housing. And my feeling is that the cost of housing affects one kind of homeless person, the shredded safety net homeless, people who've lost a job and they have medical bills and they can't afford both the house and the medical bills, a lot of that kind of stuff. I think those folks are affected by the high cost of housing. And that the thing though with those folks is frequently they have family resources to draw on, and they can sleep on couches while they kind of get their lives back together a little bit. So the folks who fall into drug use, or I have to say the other thing, what often happens I think too is people are homeless for one reason, and the meth is so prevalent when they get to the street that they stay there because of the methamphetamine. That's another thing. I mean, for example, in California, we have very, I would say, draconian laws about where sex offenders can live, and frequently sex offenders cannot find places to live and end up on the street. Not a good place for a sex offender to be. But that's another kind of homelessness. There are many kinds of homelessness. It's important to understand that it's a very complicated thing. With everybody's got their own story, but I think. The Tenton Cameron homeless issue, I think that's largely because of this meth. Now, why the neuroscience of it all? I don't know, and I have clearly stated that in both the article and the book. It's not something that I'm trying to prove conclusively and scientifically. I'll leave that up to neuroscientists and neuropsychologists to do the studies and figure out explanations by themselves. But it is just absolutely overwhelming, the evidence that this stuff is this mental illness, schizophrenia, and all that stuff is accompanying this methamphetamine as it goes across the country.
Yeah, sure. Al, do you have another question for Sam? I have one more, but go ahead if you had any.
I just want to say I see the book on Amazon right now is the #1 new release for criminology. That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And just what's next? What's on your radar? I'm sure you're busy promoting this book and doing all that, but do you have an idea for your next journey? Your next?
I have a few ideas that are kind of off this topic a bit, because I've written now 2 books about heroin and drug trafficking and fentanyl now and meth and all that. And so I'm kind of looking for other issues. I'm not really sure just yet. Right now, I'm pretty exhausted, honestly. I've been doing interviews, and it's wonderful. It's great. And it's the response to the book has been fantastic, but figuring out what's next I'm going to leave that maybe for 6 months to a year from now.
Sure. Yeah.
Focus on this and then go from there.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, I did read your book Dreamland in anticipation of this interview. I couldn't tell you how much I enjoyed it. It was awesome book.
Thank you.
So I hope you don't take too much of a break, because I'm starting to enjoy your work quite a bit.
I'll see.
I'm curious what you've heard in terms of a response by the United States government in cracking down on supply of this drug.
Yeah, I have not heard much. However, first of all, it's early yet. On the other hand, I think it's clear that the Biden administration is very, very concerned about this. They sent the Secretary of State, Blinken, to talk with the Mexican government and pressure the Mexican government. I would say that that's absolutely what needs to happen, and in very, very strong terms. This is an outrage. This really has the hallmarks, to me, as much as a drug addiction problem. It seems to me like a national poisoning, honestly. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I would say one thing, and that is that this is a problem that we have a hand in as well. And one way that Americans don't understand too clearly, but I think is absolutely the case, is that the guns that people can buy in our country are so easily are then smuggled down to Mexico. Those traffickers down there enjoy impunity to make these scandalous, outrageous quantities of these drugs because of the guns that are smuggled down from here. I mean, mostly it's a huge percentage of the guns used in Mexico come from the United States, and very often what those guns are used for is to enforce the impunity that the trafficking world enjoys, so they can make scandalous quantities of these drugs and not be bothered. So to me, again, Mexico has its own very, very endemic issues of corruption and collaboration with the drug trafficking world, and all of that absolutely has to be really top of the agenda between the two countries. But I would say too that we have our own issues to recognize and deal with, and I think we need to spend a whole lot more time trying to interdict those guns that are going south through the border crossings. They're going through those border crossings, and so that would be one thing I think that would rightly be a major priority for this administration and others that come.
Absolutely. We couldn't agree more. Sam Quinones, we really appreciate your time and the work that you do. Really, truly, doing the Lord's work out there, and we couldn't thank you enough. His new book is The Least of Us: True Tales of America and Hope in the Time of Fentanyl and Meth. Sam Quinones, thanks for your time. We hope to do it sometime soon.
Look forward to it, guys. Thanks very, very much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Sam.
Awesome. That was great, Sam.
Wonderful. When do you think this might run?
Probably Monday.
Yep.
Okay. I am very interested in the response. People, whatever the response is, positive, I don't care really necessarily, but just let me know what you're finding.
Yeah.
Be very interesting to know that, and maybe if you want to send me a link or two to where the responses are coming in, that'd be great.
Absolutely. We'll send you a link to our TikTok. That's where the most of the response came from. And if you have a couple minutes, read through the comments, and I think you'd be quite interested. Sam, one of the things that jumped out to me that it was actually kind of hopeful, was a positive in this whole thing, is when ex-addicts would comment on the video, giving either their response to a comment or their own personal experience, they would sign off with the years that they've been clean. And it was very, very cool to see, because it looks like within that community, there's a lot of people that are trying to right the ship. So, a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak.
Sounds good. Wonderful, fellas. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.